Hey guys, tonight we drift northward far beyond the warm lands, past the last ploughed fields and the edge of known maps. The air here smells of iron and seaweed. The wind howls like a living thing and the horizon dissolves into mist. Our story begins not with kings or monks, but with a rumour that refuses to die, a Viking army that marched into the clouds one morning and never came back. You can almost see their ghostly outlines against the fog shields, flashing axes raised, voices fading into the sky. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there in your corner of the world. Now find yourself a cosy seat or a soft bed. Let your mind begin to unwind and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The whispers begin in damp taverns along the Norwegian coast, places where the beer tastes faintly of smoke and salt. Fishermen claim that on certain mornings when fog clings to the fjords, they hear the distant clang of iron like ghostly warriors marching somewhere above the cliffs. Others swear they've found spearheads high in mountain gullies where no man should ever have climbed. A few claim to have seen lights drifting in the clouds, moving in disciplined ranks before fading into the ether. These stories, half drunk and half believed, reach scholars in Oslo and Reykjavik. Most dismiss them as folklore, like tales of the Draugr, the undead mariners said to guard their treasure in the sea's depths. But there's something persistent about this one. It doesn't stay buried like other ghost stories. It spreads century after century, mutating slightly, but always returning to the same spine-chilling core of Viking hosts that vanished into thin air. A mainstream historical fact anchors us here. During the late 9th century, Viking armies indeed roamed across Britain and northern Europe. The so-called Great Heathen Army, an alliance of Norse warbands, swept through England between the years 865 and 878, conquering towns, burning monasteries and unsettling kingdoms. Historians have records of them almost everywhere, except for one contingent that simply drops out of the chronicles. Now, a quirky tidbit: some Icelandic sagas mention a battle above the mists where warriors fought spirits that took the shapes of wolves. Scholars often shrug this off as poetic metaphor, but a few local traditions around Trondheim place that battle near an actual mountain ridge notorious for sudden whiteouts. It's the kind of place where even a compass spins in lazy circles, and people joke that the sky eats sound. Historians continue to dispute whether this missing host ever existed at all, or if chroniclers confused one army for another. Paperwork in the Middle Ages was, to put it kindly, chaotic. Still, archaeological teams have unearthed enough scattered relics to suggest something unusual. High on Mount Sulen, a farmer's son found a rusted sword whose hilt bore the serpent patterns typical of late Viking craftsmanship. The sword was lodged halfway into a boulder, as if someone had tried to drive it down before disappearing. The tale grows thicker the deeper one listens. In one 12th century monastery record, a monk describes seeing a black storm rising from the valley, and men within it walking toward the sun. He claims he could hear horns blowing inside the cloud before it drifted out to sea. The entry ends abruptly, followed by several ink stains, as though the monk's hand trembled too much to continue. Modern skeptics propose natural explanations. Maybe the marching army was a mirage caused by temperature inversion, layers of warm and cold air, bending light until distant figures appear multiplied or elevated. Indeed, in the Arctic, one can sometimes see phantom ships floating above the ocean, a phenomenon known today as a superior mirage. It's perfectly plausible until you realise these stories describe sound movement and objects left behind. Mirages don't drop spears. The real question that gnaws at every storyteller's mind is this: where did they go? If they perished, where are the bodies? If they fled, why in such silence? And if something else swallowed them, what shape does that silence take? One evening beneath a sky thick with grey, an old historian named Henrik Lunde hikes the same northern path described in the sagas. He carries a walking stick, a flask of coffee, and the curiosity of a man who's read too many conflicting footnotes. The mist descends as he climbs, each breath colder than the last. He reaches a plateau where the world vanishes into white, and for a moment he swears he hears metal striking stone, one sharp clang, then another. When he looks down, he finds only stones and lichen. Henrik notes with dry Scandinavian humour that perhaps the gods enjoy teasing archaeologists, but as he descends, he can't shake the sensation that something vast moved just beyond the veil of fog. Maybe air currents, maybe the echo of his own steps, maybe the ghosts of men who once believed they could conquer the sky. He brings back a few photographs, a handful of soil, and one story that refuses to fit neatly into any museum label. The The soil contains microscopic traces of iron more than what's typical for that altitude, almost as if weapons had rusted there in great number. Scientists at the University of Bergen test the samples, but find no pattern, only mystery. Somewhere between superstition and science, the legend holds. It grows in the telling, like mist curling through a fjord at dawn, thickening, reshaping, and yet never settling. And as the whispers stretch through time, the story turns from rumour into obsession, guiding us to the next part of our strange journey, to the gathering of a real army centuries ago whose destiny may have inspired this haunting tale. The firelight fades, the drums begin to beat in memory, and we follow those men as they assemble at the edge of the world, unaware that their footsteps are about to echo into eternity. The year is somewhere around 876, at least that's what the annals claim, though the dates blur like smoke. Across the fjords of Norway, longships creak against wooden piers, their hulls slick with tar and salt. Men gather from villages that smell of pine resin and whale oil, drawn by whispers of a great campaign. It isn't unusual for Vikings to assemble armies. They've done it for decades. But this time, something feels different. They call the meeting place Verdens Ende, the edge of the world. It's an actual cliff, the kind where clouds drift below your feet. Even the most hardened warriors glance at the horizon and cross themselves, or mutter to Odin just in case. The leader is said to be a chieftain named Bjorn Ironcloak, a man whose beard could hide small birds and whose voice sounds like gravel rolling in a barrel. He has returned from England with stories of treasures untaken and lands unseen, yet he doesn't speak much of gold this time. Around his campfire he talks instead of signs, omens carved into driftwood that washed ashore after a storm. A path through the sky, he says softly, a road to the gods themselves. The younger men cheer, the older ones pretend not to shiver. As a mainstream historical fact, large Norse warbands did indeed unite for cross-sea campaigns. The great heathen army that ravaged Anglo-Saxon England drew fighters from Norway, Denmark and Sweden, forming seasonal coalitions that could reach up to several thousand warriors. They gathered at strategic coastal sites where the winds were strong and the spirits stronger. Many historians note that such meetings often combined practical logistics with religious ritual. Before swords were lifted, mead was poured for both the living and the dead. A quirky tidbit survives in an obscure saga fragment. It describes a ritual horn carved from the bone of a whale, so huge that it supposedly required 2 men to lift. When blown, it called the fog from the sea and silenced all birds. Scholars have long debated whether that's poetic exaggeration or some early description of acoustic resonance bouncing between cliffs. Either way, that horn becomes a character in our tale, its note said to open the gateway to their doomed march. The preparation takes days. Blacksmiths hammer out spearheads, leatherworkers stitch boots thick enough to trudge across mountains. The weight of each shield, around 7 kilograms or roughly 15.5 pounds, feels heavier in the damp air, yet no one complains. They're Vikings after all. Complaining would earn you a poetic insult involving goats. Bjorn's captains draw lines in the mud to mark formations. At night they light pitch torches that spit sparks into the fog, and from a distance it looks as if stars have fallen onto the earth. There's laughter, singing, the thud of axes testing tree trunks. But there's also tension. The ravens circling above never seem to land. Some swear they see shapes moving in the mist, too large to be men, too slow to be wind. One evening a stranger arrives. No one knows his name, only that he comes from the north beyond Tromsø, where winter lasts nearly the whole year, and daylight can vanish for months. His face is hidden beneath a hood sewn with seal fur, his hands wrapped in linen, though the air is not yet cold enough to bite. He carries a pouch of ash, and claims it fell from the sky. When Bjorn demands to know why he's come, the stranger answers simply, to follow where your path will end. That line, historians argue, might have been an invention of later storytellers. Some think it represents the archetype of the vulva, a seer or prophetess, though in this case rendered male for dramatic effect. Others believe the stranger could symbolize a Christian monk seeking to dissuade pagan raiders. The academic community remains divided. No single interpretation satisfies all. Yet within the camp, the effect is electric. Soldiers whisper that the gods have sent a guide. The next morning, Bjorn orders the ships dismantled, a stunning move that even his closest men question. He claims they will march inland following the smoke that rises from the earth. This confuses everyone because inland means uphill, through mountain passes known for sudden storms. But no one dares challenge a man whose nickname involves iron. As dawn breaks the army, perhaps 800 strong each man carrying roughly 20 kilograms, about 44 pounds of gear, begins its ascent. The sound of their boots striking the rock echoes like thunder. Below them, villagers watch from doorways clutching charms carved from antler. By noon, the procession has vanished behind the ridges swallowed by grey weather. Down at the shore, only the remains of their camp remain, circles of scorched earth, fragments of charred wood, and that giant whalebone horn resting beside the extinguished fire. A shepherd boy later claims he heard it sound one last time, faint but clear from far above the clouds. His description matches a low-frequency rumble that modern scientists estimate could carry several kilometres or a couple of miles under certain atmospheric conditions. Whether someone truly blew the horn or the wind played tricks again remains unresolved. Centuries later, when archaeologists survey the site, they find odd traces: ship nails, far inland charcoal, mixed with obsidian shards, and a ring etched with runes that don't translate cleanly. One rune resembles a spiral, another an upward arrow. The translation attempts vary from path to heaven to storm above. The debate as usual continues. Meanwhile, the story passes down through generations. Parents tell children that the Ironcloak's men marched into the sky to build new halls for Odin. Sailors use the tale as a weather warning. If the mist won't lift, remember Bjorn's march. It becomes both a myth and a map pointing to nowhere and everywhere. And so the army climbs, their footsteps fading into thinner air, their banners fluttering against a sky that already feels too close. The forest awaits them dark and whispering where roots tangle like sleeping serpents, and old gods hide behind every pine. The road narrows, the light dims, and the boundary between world and legend begins to blur. The sound of the whalebone horn lingers a little longer in the listener's ear, a single mournful note that promises wonders and warns of endings. Ahead lies the forest where gods once walked. The forest greets them like a cathedral built by giants. The trunks of the pines rise straight and endless, their barks slick with mist, their crowns lost somewhere above the veil of fog. Each step lands on a carpet of moss so thick it swallows sound. Even the clinking of armour dulls to a soft, eerie hush. The Vikings who have weathered storms at sea and fire on the battlefield find this silence far more unsettling. The air smells of wet iron and pine sap. Their breath turns to vapour, hanging close as if reluctant to leave their mouths. The locals call this place Gudaskogen, the forest of the gods. Old farmers still leave bowls of milk at its edge, offerings for spirits who dislike being disturbed. The Vikings laugh at that, of course. They've faced kings and conquered abbeys. What's a few trees compared to battle? But laughter fades quickly when the wind begins to whisper their names. At first, it's a trick of acoustic sound, travelling strangely through moisture-heavy air. But by the second night, men swear they hear voices weaving through the branches, chants in forgotten tongues, soft, weeping. Sometimes a single word repeated again and again. One man insists the forest is calling for someone named Sigurd. The problem is there are 3 Sigurds in the army and all 3 claim they didn't answer. A mainstream historical fact grounds the strangeness. Viking belief systems place sacred significance on groves and old trees. Many pre-Christian shrines were literally forest clearings, marked by carved poles known as ve. Sacrifices, animal and occasionally human, took place beneath canopies thought to bridge the mortal and divine worlds. Archaeologists have even uncovered evidence near Uppsala of posts arranged in circles surrounded by pits filled with offerings. To a Norse mind, a forest wasn't just nature, it was a living threshold between worlds. And now the quirky tidbit: deep in Swedish folklore, there's mention of skogsrå forest spirits described as women from the front, but hollow like rotten logs from behind. They lure travellers off paths and keep them wandering in circles until sunrise. Centuries later, hikers still report strange compass failures in these regions, where magnetic north wobbles, as if the earth itself is breathing. Coincidence, perhaps. Or maybe these forests remember things. Historians remain divided over whether the Vikings truly believed their gods physically walked among them. Some argue that Odin and Thor were seen more as distant archetypes. Others claim certain rituals implied the gods could literally manifest in mist or fire. No one agrees on the boundaries of myth and faith, and perhaps that's the point. The forest seems designed to erase boundaries of any kind. Bjorn Ironcloak's host moves slowly now, wary of hidden ravines and treacherous bogs. Scouts mark trees with carved runes to prevent losing direction. The marks are crude. Arrows circles a few attempts at humour. One simply reads, If you find this, you're lost. The men chuckle, but tension clings to their laughter like dew. Fog presses thicker as they climb, transforming the forest into an endless maze. Distances warp. What seems 10 paces away stretches into 100 metres, or roughly 330 feet. The same rock appears twice. Birds stop singing altogether. Even time feels unmoored. Daylight never quite arrives. Twilight never quite leaves. During the march, they stumble upon an ancient standing stone blackened by lichen and carved with spirals that catch the light oddly. The stone hums faintly when touched. The men argue whether it's the wind or something deeper vibrating through it. One of Bjorn's lieutenants claims to feel warmth pulsing inside like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. He withdraws his hand quickly and pretends nothing happened. That night, the fog glows faintly blue around the edges of campfires. Some think it's trick light, others a sign of the gods. One warrior jokes that Loki is testing new lighting effects. No one laughs. Somewhere distant thunder rolls through the sky above remains clear. In a rare moment of calm, Bjorn confides to his second-in-command, a woman named Astrid of the silver hair, a skald who fights better than half his men. If we die here, he murmurs, let it be where the gods can hear us. Astrid smirks and replies, then speak louder. Her sarcasm earns a few nervous chuckles, breaking the tension for a heartbeat. Mainstream historians record that Viking expeditions sometimes included women of rank and skill. Grave finds from Birka and Kalpan confirm female warriors buried with weapons, jewellery and coins identical to their male counterparts. The concept of the shield maiden isn't just saga exaggeration, it's archaeology with attitude. By the fourth day, supplies run low. Bread hardens, meat spoils. The air temperature drops to around 5 degrees Celsius, about 41 degrees Fahrenheit, though it feels colder because of the moisture. The men wrap themselves in furs that smell of seawater and smoke. A few claim to see faint lights moving between trees like torches, but greenish and silent. Astrid insists they're will-o'-the-wisps gases from decaying roots. Bjorn mutters that the dead are restless. The next morning they discover hoofprints circling the camp, but no animals. The prints are large, deeper than a moose's, spaced like those of a trotting horse. Yet there are no droppings, no broken branches. They follow the tracks for several hundred metres, nearly 1,000 feet, before they vanish at a stream. The water there runs warm, oddly enough, around 20 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and steams even in the cool air. Some men dip their hands and swear it tingles like static. Scientists centuries later will speculate geothermal vents might underlie the region. Others suspect lightning strikes that heated subsurface rock. None of that helps the Vikings, who see divine fingerprints everywhere. A few kneel and pray. One throws his sword into the stream as payment. The blade hisses as it sinks, leaving ripples that glow faintly before fading. Night falls again, darker this time. Rain begins to whisper, soft but steady tapping against helmets and shields. In the distance, wolves howl, their voices stretched by echo until they sound almost human. The campfire sputters. Smoke curls low, reluctant to rise. Bjorn gathers his warriors and speaks plainly. Whatever this forest is, it listens, so listen back. It's the sort of cryptic wisdom that makes no sense and yet feels right. They quiet their laughter, check their weapons, and press on into the murk. As dawn threatens to break, the path widens into a ravine. A strange wind funnels through it, carrying the scent of stone and something faintly metallic like blood or lightning. Beyond the valley opens wide and deep, a place no map marks, where sound rolls endlessly from wall to wall. They pause at the threshold, staring into that hollow of mist and echoes. The forest falls silent behind them, as if holding its breath. Ahead lies the valley that legends will name the place where the sky begins. The ravine spills open into a basin so vast it feels less like a valley, and more like a mouth, an ancient wound in the earth. The fog pools thickly here, twisting in slow currents that conceal and reveal the land by turns. When the wind sweeps through, it brings a hollow chorus, 1,000 faint reverberations rolling against the cliffs. Every sound bounces back the scrape of a boot, the cough of a tired man, the clatter of shields. It's as if the valley itself is mimicking them, rehearsing their every move with eerie precision. The Vikings name it Echodalen, the Valley of Endless Echoes. It's a real place, or at least it was. Several valleys in Norway still carry that name today, carved by glaciers, and filled with acoustic tricks so powerful that even a whisper can bounce for several seconds. To the Norse of centuries past, such phenomena weren't science, they were sorcery. Bjorn Ironcloak's army descends carefully. single file down a slope of wet shale. The rocks slide underfoot, sending tiny avalanches rattling into the mist below. The air is colder now, about 2 degrees Celsius, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to turn breath into fog and fingers numb beneath their gloves. Yet it isn't just the chill that unsettles them. The deeper they go, the more distorted their echoes become. A man laughs once sharply, and the echo returns as a low, mournful moan. One of the younger soldiers jokes that the valley doesn't approve of bad humour. The others don't laugh. Even Astrid, usually quick with a quip, keeps her voice low. A mainstream historical fact grounds this moment. Norse chroniclers often described natural formations as living presences. Mountains could listen, rivers could judge, and valleys could swallow sound to feed the dwarves below. These weren't quaint metaphors. They expressed a worldview in which nature wasn't backdrop, it was participant. The sagas teach that to travel through such places without offering respect was asking for misfortune. And indeed, a quirky little custom appears in an old Icelandic text. When crossing echoing valleys, travellers were told to drop a coin or bead into the first stream they met as payment to the land for carrying their voices. The Vikings of Bjorn's host know this tradition, but in their haste or arrogance they skip it. Perhaps that's when things start to go wrong. By midday, the mist thickens into what sailors later call cloud sea. Visibility shrinks to a few metres, about 10 feet. Men hold on to each other's shoulders to stay in formation. The sound of dripping water becomes maddening, steady hollow, impossible to locate. Sometimes the drips echo from far above. Other times they seem to fall from nowhere. Then the whispers begin again. At first they assume it's their own ranks muttering through the fog. But as the day drags on, words emerge, faint echoing repetitions that don't match anyone's speech. A soldier shouts halt, and 10 heartbeats later the valley replies with the same word stretched thin and wrong. Another yells, "Who's there?" and receives an answer in an unfamiliar tongue. Historians remain divided about this part of the legend. Some interpret it as auditory confusion in dense fog where sound refracts unpredictably. Others suggest psychological strain, mass hysteria among tired, hungry men. And a smaller fringe group of researchers proposes something more exotic infrasound, the low-frequency vibration caused by air moving across irregular stone surfaces, known to trigger feelings of dread and disorientation. Whatever the cause, morale begins to crack. 2 scouts vanish after wandering ahead to find a dry path. When the others call out their names, echo back from opposite directions. The army splits briefly, panicking in the white void. It takes an hour before Bjorn's horn calls them back together, a single trembling note from the whalebone horn left behind, now somehow in his grasp again. The sound rolls through the valley like thunder trapped inside a shell. As evening falls, they establish camp beside a narrow stream that glows faintly green, under torchlight minerals perhaps, or something stranger. The mist condenses into droplets that cling to armour, leaving shimmering trails like silver veins. When a soldier drinks from the stream, he claims it tastes sweet, almost metallic. Astrid forbids anyone else from touching it. That night, thunder rumbles without lightning. The clouds overhead pulse faintly with inner light as if alive. Some men swear they see shapes moving, vast, slow figures drifting just beyond perception. One claims he spots a column of warriors marching through the sky, each bearing a torch. His friend insists it's only the reflection of their own fires in the fog. They argue until both realise their breath is visible, but the reflected figures breathe the other way. A quirky tidbit of geology adds flavour here. Northern Scandinavia sits atop layers of magnetite, a naturally magnetic mineral. Travellers with compasses, or in this case crude lodestones, often reported erratic readings in such regions. The Vikings used the sun and landmarks for navigation, but here in the fog even the sun refuses to appear. Directions dissolve, every rock looks the same. Bjorn orders a night watch, but sleep overtakes most of the men. Dreams come vivid and strange. One man wakes screaming that he stood in the clouds watching the world below like a map. Another insists he saw ships sailing upside down, their sails woven from lightning. Bjorn himself dreams of climbing a stair made of mist, each step humming underfoot. When he wakes, he can still feel the vibration in his bones. By morning, the fog is thicker than ever, heavy as wool. The sound of their movement seems swallowed, replaced by faint rhythmic thuds from the valley's far side. It could be echo or drums or something massive walking within the cloud. No one knows. The horses refuse to move. Even the ravens, those opportunistic followers of armies, have vanished. Bjorn rallies his men with what's left of his iron calm. If the gods have built a wall of mist, he declares, then we climb it. It's bravado, but it works. The warriors grip their axes tighter and push forward, vanishing one by one into the white. Behind them, the valley holds its breath. The echoes fall silent as though the mountains are listening rather than answering. Later chroniclers will call this day the March into Heaven's Veil. Modern meteorologists, meanwhile, suspect a sudden updraft warm air rising from the valley floor into cooler layers above, creating a self-sustaining fog bank. It's a convincing explanation except for one detail: the fog reportedly glowed. There are natural luminescent gases, phosphine, methane, but none that pulse in rhythm like a heartbeat. The final man in the rearguard hesitates, staring at the place where the fog seems to shine brightest. He mutters a prayer, steps forward, and is gone. Behind him, the valley returns to stillness. No shouts, no clatter of iron, no final echo. Just wind curling through rock, whispering their last procession. And as the mist closes like a curtain, one might almost imagine the earth exhaling content at having swallowed an army whole. Morning arrives without sunlight. The valley has transformed into a world of white and silver, every outline softened until nothing looks real. The air tastes of iron and rain. When the first of Bjorn Ironcloak's men steps forward, his boots vanish below the knees as if he's walking into milk. The rest follow a slow column of silhouettes dissolving into vapour. Somewhere behind them, the whalebone horn lets out one long trembling note, deep enough to make the ground vibrate beneath their feet. No one speaks. The mist muffles everything except the drip of condensation sliding from helmets and the faint clink of chainmail. It feels as though they've entered not a storm but another dimension, a space where sound dies, time stutters, and weight itself grows uncertain. Astrid of the silver hair keeps to Bjorn's side, her fingers brushing the hilt of her sword, as though to remind it they're still bound by the laws of the earth. Every few steps she glances upward. The cloud glows from within, pulses of blue and amber weaving like auroras trapped inside wool. Once she reaches out her hand and swears, the air ripples beneath her fingers. A mainstream historical fact anchors this strangeness. Viking records and later Norse Christian chronicles often describe unusual atmospheric phenomena, glowing mists, fiery skies, sun pillars that we now know as reflections of light on ice crystals or volcanic dust. The 9th century, after all, coincided with eruptions from Iceland and even distant Alaska that would have cast strange colours across the northern heavens. Yet the accounts from this legend speak of a mist that glowed from the ground upward, not from the sky down, a detail science struggles to fit neatly. A quirky tidbit ancient Norse weather omens sometimes warned of the Bifrost fallen, the rainbow bridge of the gods collapsing into mortal air. When strange lights flickered low on the horizon, villagers would say the gods had descended to inspect the deeds of men. Superstitious farmers still mutter that phrase when northern lights dip unusually close to the earth the bridge is falling. The surviving saga fragment describing this event, the March of the Cloud, host contains lines so vivid scholars still debate whether they record an eyewitness or a poet's imagination. It reads, "They went as spears into smoke. Their breath turned to glass, and the sky took them as payment." The verse is fragmented, copied centuries later by a monk who admitted in the margin that he did not understand its meaning. Historians remain divided. Some see allegory for a failed expedition lost in snow. Others suspect a memory of real disaster, volcanic gas, sudden avalanche, or something more complex. Inside the mist, men begin to vanish one by one. There's no scream, no struggle, only the quiet absence of footsteps. Astrid notices first. She counts the rhythm of marching boots and realizes the beat thins between heartbeats. "Bjorn," she whispers, "our numbers shrink." He nods grimly, lips blue from cold. "Keep moving. If the gods call them better to arrive together." Soon shapes appear within the fog, dark ridges rising and falling like frozen waves. They're massive, arching overhead, carved with patterns that seem both natural and deliberate spirals, ridges, lines of light. Some swear they see runes etched into the clouds themselves, glowing briefly before fading. One warrior reaches out and claims he feels stone beneath his palm. Another insists it's warm flesh. Lightning flickers soundlessly across the mist, illuminating faces pale and glistening with dew. The temperature shifts wildly one moment, near freezing the next, warm enough to melt frost from their helmets. Instruments and amulets heat against their skin. A few men toss away charms that burn their necks. The fog seems alive, breathing in slow, immense pulses. Astrid tries to anchor them with song. Her voice rises a low chant from old skaldic verses meant to guide souls in battle. It steadies the men for a while, but as her tune echoes, the valley returns it differently, deeper, older, harmonizing with her in a tone no human throat could reach. The sound vibrates through their bones, unsettling yet strangely beautiful. A few soldiers fall to their knees, believing they hear the All-Father himself answering. Modern acousticians analysing descriptions like these propose infrasound again, those subaudible frequencies produced by wind interacting with cliffs or glaciers. Such vibrations can induce awe, fear, even hallucinations. They may well explain visions of voices from the sky. Yet no experiment accounts for the synchronized glow that multiple witnesses describe, nor for the metallic residue found centuries later on stones from the site. At the heart of the mist, Bjorn raises his sword and sees droplets cling to the blade, forming tiny orbs of light that slide upward rather than down. He laughs a low, almost desperate laugh and shouts, "We are walking the bridge." The fog swells around him, swallowing the sound. Astrid tries to reach him, but her hand meets resistance like pushing through thick water. She feels warmth, then emptiness. The last thing she remembers is the sky opening above them. Not blue, but a shifting mosaic of colour green and violet twisting like silk. The mist lifts just a little, and she glimpses far below the valley floor gleaming like glass. The world seems inverted. She can't tell whether they've climbed or fallen. Then comes the thunder. Not crash, but a rolling pressure that flattens the air. Light bursts upward, dazzling white. The ground tilts. For a heartbeat, everyone sees everyone else suspended mid-step, eyes wide in wonder. And then nothing. The chronicles call it the day the sky swallowed men. Local lore adds a darker version that lightning rose from the earth, not from the clouds, devouring the army in pillars of fire. Peasants miles away claimed to see the heavens opening and a river of light ascending, followed by a rain of ash that tasted faintly of salt. Scientists centuries later propose an explosive discharge of methane, or phosphine gas from beneath thawing permafrost, ignited perhaps by static or lightning. The conditions fit bogs, minerals, trapped gases. Such an event could indeed produce pillars of fire, instant asphyxiation and glowing mist. But skeptics note that no charred remains have ever been found, only corroded weapons fused with something like glass. The only confirmed find from the valley floor is a round shield, half-burned yet intact in its centre, discovered centuries later beneath layers of peat. Its wood is charred in a perfect spiral, and its iron boss still smells faintly metallic when struck. Some claim that when tapped it hums faintly at low frequency, like the echo of that vanished horn. And as night falls over the empty valley, the fog finally begins to lift. No bodies, no footprints, only rippled ground and faint heat rising from the earth as though the land itself exhales after swallowing something enormous. Far above, the aurora drapes the sky in shifting curtains of colour shimmering with quiet majesty. To the few who watch from distant hills, it looks almost like an army, still marching, their shields gleaming in cold fire, their formation perfect, endless and forever ascending. Weeks later, when the storm finally breaks and sunlight dares return to the valley, the villagers from the lowlands climb cautiously toward the silence. They've watched the mist roil for days, without thinning, glowing at night like a sleeping beast. Now it hangs low and tattered threads of vapour trailing across jagged stone. The first searchers expect corpses. Instead, they find emptiness and echoes. Every sound rebounds unnaturally. Footsteps multiply until the cliffs seem alive with invisible marchers. Shouts bounce back, twisted as though mocked by unseen voices. The shepherds whisper that the valley remembers the army and is trying to speak them back into being. Then among the blackened rocks, someone finds the first relic, a half-melted sword, its hilt fused to a clump of stone. The blade has curled like a leaf scorched by fire. Nearby lies a circle of small bones, delicate as bird skeletons, but arranged deliberately, perhaps a ritual, perhaps, just the way wind sorted them after centuries. A mainstream historical fact, Northern Europe's peatlands often preserve artefacts for astonishing lengths of time. Oxygen-poor soil halts decay, keeping wood leather, and even flesh intact for 1,000 years. Archaeologists have unearthed weapons carts and entire bodies so fresh they still bear fingerprints. When modern excavators reach the supposed Valley of Echoes, they indeed uncover metal fragments consistent with 9th century Norse craftsmanship. Iron alloyed with traces of manganese, a signature of Scandinavian smelting. But the distribution is peculiar, clustered in a pattern suggesting an explosion, not a battle. A quirky tidbit, one of the excavators, an unflappable Danish geologist, reported that every time his pick struck a certain boulder, the sound lingered for several seconds, humming like a bell. The recording still exists. You can hear it online if you search carefully. Some swear they detect voices inside the reverberation. As for the chronicles, they describe the aftermath with monastic restraint. And when the mist withdrew, there were found shields, burnt bones of beasts and earth that shone. The Latin word used for shone is lucere, implying not reflection but inner light. Historians debate the translation endlessly. Did the ground literally glow, perhaps from phosphorescent minerals, or did the chronicler mean glorious, as in metaphorical radiance no consensus? The strangest discovery, though, is the shield. It lies half buried at the centre of the valley floor, blackened around the rim, yet unburned at its core. The wood, when later carbon dated, indeed belongs to the 9th century. The metal boss remains attached, warped, but intact. What baffles researchers is that the shield was found warm, not metaphorically, but measurably, when uncovered from peat that should have been near freezing. The heat faded after hours, yet for a time it steamed in the mountain air. Local diggers crossed themselves. One muttered that the gods were still cooking their meal. Astrid's name surfaces again in a half-lost saga fragment. She bore the shield that burned but was not consumed. Scholars suspect that line inspired the later legend of a Valkyrie queen who led the lost warriors into the clouds. Others think the poet reused biblical imagery, the burning bush transposed into pagan myth. Still others shrug and blame centuries of copy errors by monks who had never seen a Viking shield in their lives. When word of the find spread, scientists flocked to the site. Among them, a physicist from Bergen named Erik Nieland conducts spectroscopic tests on residue scraped from the shield's rim. The results show traces of silicon dioxide fused with iron oxide, essentially natural glass. That shouldn't happen below temperatures of roughly 1,500 degrees Celsius, about 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. No lightning strike could have sustained such heat evenly. Something here, he writes, cooked the stones without fire. Locals have their own explanation. They say the army was taken upward in fire, and what remains is the footprint of that ascent, the scorch mark of a god's ladder. The shield, according to folklore, is the last step, still glowing from where it touched the divine. At night, when winds sweep through the valley, the shield sometimes hums. The pitch is low, almost imperceptible, more felt than heard. Herders camping nearby claim it vibrates through the ground into their bones. One swears that during a thunderstorm he saw blue sparks dancing across its surface like static from another world. Modern acousticians suggest piezoelectric effects, pressure and temperature changes in quartz veins, creating weak electrical currents. Romantic minds prefer to imagine something older, the echo of the vanished army still marching trapped in metal and stone. A peculiar pattern emerges as researchers map the site. The melted weapons, the bone circles and the shield form a rough spiral counterclockwise expanding outward. The same pattern appears on runestones found miles away, carved with swirling motifs historians long dismissed as decorative. Now those motifs look eerily familiar. Did the Vikings already know this symbol before they marched? Did they follow it here deliberately? The debate turns feverish. Academic conferences produce papers with titles like Plasma Phenomena in Norse Archaeology and Symbolic Topography of the Vanished Host. None agree on what truly happened. The only certainty is that something powerful enough to fuse metal and silent sound struck this valley more than a millennium ago. Still, the legend refuses to remain purely scientific. Travellers continue to visit lighting candles, at dusk leaving small wooden runes etched with names of lost kin. When mist creeps back into the hollow, their flames distort and waver, stretching upward like tiny souls trying to escape. The air smells faintly of ozone and wet iron, the scent of storms or of memory. One evening, as the sun dips behind the ridges, a tourist takes a photograph of the shield under glass. Later, when he reviews it, faint silhouettes appear in the mist behind the display-helmeted shapes, half transparent, facing away as if still marching. The museum staff blame reflections. The visitor deletes the picture that night, but dreams of footsteps pacing endlessly overhead. Historians still dispute whether the shield truly came from Bjorn's host, or from another lost warband entirely. Radiocarbon dating, after all, only tells when the tree was felled, not who held it. But among the rusted fragments and quiet soil, there's a sense that time itself paused here holding its breath, as the world tried to remember what it forgot. And somewhere between science and superstition, between echo and silence, the legend shifts again toward parchment ink and trembling hands that will try to make sense of it all. The monks will write of this wonder, next turning molten earth into scripture, and in doing so, perhaps creating the mystery we still chase. Far from the northern mists, in a stone monastery perched above the North Sea, a monk dips his quill into dark ink and begins a new entry in the Annals Reni. The year he believes is 877, though the seasons have been strange lately. He has written of famine, storms, and kings whose names already sound uncertain. But today he writes of a phenomenon reported by traders out of Norway, a host of pagans taken by the heavens. The script is neat but hurried. The monk brother Ethelric squints at the parchment and hesitates before continuing. He writes again. There was seen in the northern sky a light like fire, and many men vanished into it. He adds no further comment, then draws a small cross beside the passage as if to ward off the very thought. That line, preserved in a single surviving copy centuries later, becomes the cornerstone of the legend's written history. Monastic archives across Britain and France soon echo similar phrasing: an army consumed by the clouds, a miracle of flame in the mist, the wrath of heaven upon heathen men. Whether these scribes copied each other, or each heard unique reports, remains impossible to prove. A mainstream historical fact gives context here. During the 9th century, Viking incursions terrified Christian Europe. Monks saw them as divine punishment demons in human form. Chroniclers often interpreted storms, comets, or disease as God's vengeance. To them, an entire army vanishing in fog was not a mystery but justice served. A quirky tidbit emerges from the Chronicon Norvegicus, compiled later in Iceland. One marginal note scribbled beside a verse about the cloud that fed on Iron reads simply, "We heard singing above Bergen for 3 days." The handwriting differs from the main scribes perhaps added generations later. Still, it suggests that the story endured orally long after the supposed event, reshaping itself with each retelling. Scholars today debate endlessly whether such records describe a real disappearance or reflect a moral allegory, pagan pride devoured by divine smoke. Others suspect an early observation of a natural phenomenon like volcanic ash or auroral storms. But not all evidence points southward toward faith or science. Some traces pull inward toward obsession. Inside the cloisters, the monks who record the tale begin to dream strangely. One writes that he hears chanting in the wind at night words he cannot translate. Another claims his ink turns silver when he writes the name Bjorn. Ethelric, the original scribe, notes that his candle flame bends eastward when he speaks the passage aloud. He soon stops mentioning it altogether, though in later pages faint burn marks appear where the text once lay. Centuries later, paleographers analysing these manuscripts notice peculiar distortions. The parchment fibres beneath those lines are faintly darkened not by fire but by heat. Infrared scans reveal tiny globules of iron oxide embedded in the vellum, as if metallic dust had settled into wet ink. The monastery's location hundreds of kilometres or hundreds of miles from the valley makes that contamination difficult to explain. Another monk in a different abbey interprets the story as prophecy. The smoke of the north shall rise again, he warns. It shall call to the proud, and they shall follow into the air. The prophecy circulates quietly for generations, folded into sermons and travellers' songs. By the time of the Crusades, the Cloud Army has become a cautionary tale about ambition and divine retribution. Historians still debate whether these monastic texts describe separate events or multiple retellings of one myth. Some propose that later copyists merged unrelated weather phenomena into a single narrative. Others think the monks genuinely feared an unsolved disappearance, preserving it, with the only vocabulary they possessed, miracle and punishment. One thing is certain: their records intertwine faith and fear in equal measure. The more they tried to sanctify the story, the more it shimmered with pagan mystery. Margins fill with contradictory notes. They were lifted by angels. They were seized by fire from the deep. They will return when the fog opens again. Modern theologians notice something peculiar about those marginal additions. The phrasing resembles not biblical Latin but Old Norse syntax translated word for word, suggesting the monks may have recorded testimony from Scandinavian converts, perhaps survivors of Bjorn's host, or at least men who claimed to be. And indeed, one later entry in the Liber Miracolorum of St. Albans recounts how 3 northern sailors, their speech broken, arrived bearing tales of a bridge of light and a burning shield. They insisted they had been gone 7 winters and 7 days, though no ship could have survived such absence. The monks, pragmatic as always, fed them broth, baptized them, and filed the story under divine wonders. A fragment of that record survives. It describes the sailor's appearance: pale hair, bleached white as bone skin, pitted with tiny dark marks like burns. Their eyes, the chronicler writes, reflected the fire, though none was lit. Physicians today might suggest frostbite or chemical exposure. Theologians prefer to call it stigmata. One marginal sketch beside the account shows a rough circle of dots, surrounding a spiral eerily similar to the layout discovered centuries later in the valley, the melted weapons the spiral shield. Coincidence or memory passed across generations by those who witnessed what no one could explain. Meanwhile, the Abbey Bell of St Albans develops a strange fault that same winter. Each night at Vespers when the rope is pulled, the bell hums before striking a low vibration that makes glass tremble. Locals call it the Northern Tone. The monks keep ringing it anyway, perhaps secretly comforted by the sound that connects their prayers to the mystery they cannot resolve. And so the story passes from chronicler to chronicler, ink to ink, generation to generation. The words shift, the faiths change, but the shape remains constant. An army climbs, a sky opens, silence follows. By the 15th century, artists illuminate manuscripts with miniatures showing warriors stepping into clouds shaped like staircases. Gilded halos surround their helmets. Some depict Astrid as an angel, others as the hand that beckons mortals toward judgment. Through all of it, the scholars argue and the believers whisper. Did God take them? Did the earth? Or did they simply find a path that reason hasn't mapped yet? The debate continues through candlelight and centuries. Somewhere in the choir loft the bell hums again, faint but steady, echoing through the stone vaults like the valley's own memory. Centuries pass. Empires rise, languages change, and the tale of the vanished Viking army drifts into that hazy realm, where history and myth trade places without apology. Then, one damp September in the year 1968, a team of Norwegian geologists hiking through the remote Sulan Mountains stumble across something that hauls the legend back into daylight. Half buried in peat, they find metallic shards arranged in a curious spiral fused into the surrounding rock. The pattern matches a medieval drawing from the Liber Miraculorum, the same spiral that surrounded the burning shield. They haul samples back to Bergen for testing. When the first analysis arrives, the lab technicians blink. The metal is not just iron, it's vitrified, turned partially to glass by heat exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius, about 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. No known lightning strike volcanic vent or campfire could have produced that uniform fusion. It's as if the stones had been flash melted from beneath by lightning from the earth. The newspapers go wild for a week. Mystery of the sky. Army resurfaces blares a headline in Aftenposten. Scientists grumble about sensationalism, but secretly can't resist visiting the site. They find more anomalies, soil magnetism off the charts, plants stunted into perfect rings, and a persistent ozone smell after rain. A mainstream historical fact lends credibility to the excitement natural plasma phenomena. Ball lightning, St Elmo's fire and subterranean discharges are real, though poorly understood. In the 1960s, Soviet researchers documented Earth lightning, massive electrical bursts triggered by tectonic stress before earthquakes. These events can vaporize rock, generate electromagnetic pulses, and occasionally produce glowing fog. The conditions in the Sulan Range granite layers under tension, groundwater channels, ferrous ore fit disturbingly well. But the quirky detail that captivates the public comes from one of the geologists, a taciturn man named Torvald Nielsen. In a radio interview he claims his compass spun uncontrollably for 5 minutes, near the centre of the find, then pointed straight upward. Listeners write letters accusing him of fabricating the story. Others hail it as proof that the Sky Army found their bridge home. Within months, the site attracts a new generation of believers, archaeologists, mystics, physicists, and conspiracy theorists, all camping side by side. One group installs instruments to measure electromagnetic fields. Another burns incense to invite the warriors back. It would be funny if the instruments didn't actually record something steady pulses of low-frequency vibration repeating every 11 minutes. Scientists blame wind resonance or geological tremor. The mystics say it's the heartbeat of the vanished host. Modern historians re-examine the primary sources with fresh eyes. They note a chilling alignment. Reports of blue mist in the 9th century sagas coincide with ice core data showing traces of volcanic sulfur around the year 876. Could volcanic lightning mixing with methane from thawing bogs have created an explosion and luminous fog? It's plausible. But as always, one question dangles unanswered. Where are the bodies? Excavations yield no skeletons, no mass graves, just scattered bones of animals and fragments of human teeth fused into stone. Forensic analysis dates the enamel to roughly the same period as the Great Heathen Army's known campaigns. Still only a handful of fragments exist, perhaps too few for an army yet too human to ignore. The debate splits along familiar lines. Geologists point to natural catastrophe, an underground gas pocket igniting with volcanic force. Historians caution against merging folklore with science. Folklorists counter that dismissing myth outright blinds us to memory encoded in story. Every legend, one scholar writes, is a fossil of fear. Meanwhile, paranormal enthusiasts push the theory further that the army crossed a rift, a literal opening between dimensions. They cite the identical runic spiral found in England's Lindisfarne manuscripts, arguing it represents a vortex symbol. One American author even publishes the stare of fire Vikings wormholes and ancient plasma gateways. It sells remarkably well for a book featuring both Norse poetry and equations. In universities, serious research continues quietly. A physicist named Ingrid Surley models an electromagnetic surge beneath the valley using archived geological data. Her simulations show that under perfect conditions, a sudden release of pressure trapped methane and ferrous rock. A plasma column could rise from the ground to the clouds, carrying ionized dust upward like a pillar of light. In her notes she writes, "Anyone standing nearby would see the earth itself strike the sky." Surley never claims divine wrath or dimensional travel, but her findings send a shiver through colleagues. The pattern of melted soil fits. The lack of corpses fits. 2 temperatures that high would vaporize organic matter instantly. It's horrifying, but almost satisfyingly mundane. Almost, because something refuses to stay tidy. Radiation readings from the valley's core spike unpredictably, nothing lethal, just faintly above normal background levels. Instruments glitch, batteries drain, faster recordings pick up faint harmonic tones even when microphones are unplugged. Theories multiply, piezoelectric discharge, magnetic feedback, or just researcher fatigue. Still, the datasheets hum faintly when read in silence. A quirky contemporary tidbit, one graduate student swears that while cataloguing artifacts, her hair stood on end and she heard distant chanting. Her recorder captured nothing but static except for one frequency peak at 32 Hz, too low for human hearing, but enough to make skin prickle. She quit her program the next day and now paints luminous landscapes inspired by fog. The mainstream media predictably moves on, but small groups keep visiting. On cold nights, hikers claim to see pale silhouettes walking the ridges slow steady like a march across the stars. Camera footage shows only heat distortions and lens flares, yet eyewitnesses insist otherwise. The legend and the science have begun to overlap, feeding each other like mirror images. Historians continue to quarrel in polite Latin footnotes. Some say the legend began as propaganda, a cautionary fable against hubris. Others argue the opposite, that it preserves the memory of a natural event so rare it seemed supernatural. The dividing line blurs as it always does between explanation and awe. A fringe conference in Reykjavik ends with a poet's remark that sums it all up. We keep measuring thunder with rulers and forgetting it's still thunder. Meanwhile, the valley remains silent except for its faint electrical whisper. Scientists still set up sensors there, though equipment tends to fail after a few days. The shield rests in a museum case under low light, its spiral char still visible, its iron humming imperceptibly to anyone who presses an ear close enough. And somewhere in that hush, between data and dream, a few claim they've begun to understand what happened. Lightning did rise from the earth. But whether it was born from physics punishment, or the collective memory of gods who once walked these forests well, that's still open for debate. As for those who vanished, no one dares to say they're gone. The night hikers insist you can still hear them, distant boots striking invisible stone marching higher into the unseen fog. No one expects survivors. After all, centuries have passed since the supposed march into the clouds. But history, ever fond of mischief, leaves fragments where certainty should stand. 3 of them, 3 men emerge in the records like faint constellations that appear only when the night is darkest. The first account comes from a monastic journal dated roughly 9 years after the vanishment. It tells of a pale wanderer found near the coast of Jutland, shivering beside a wrecked fishing boat. His hair is white, though his face is youthful, his eyes unfocused as if they've stared too long at lightning. When questioned, he speaks only in fragments. Bridge of light, thunder stares, not death, not heaven. The monks, ever practical, assume madness or trauma. Yet when they try to shave his head for lice, their razors blunt against his hair, as if it were made of fine wire. A mainstream historical fact supports at least one layer of this story. Severe electrical exposure, lightning strikes, or high-voltage arcs can cause depigmentation, scarring, and nerve damage that leaves victims partially numb and their hair brittle and pale. The human body can survive incredible voltage, but it doesn't forget. A quirky tidbit follows the monk who recorded this incident later reports that his own ink turned faintly green whenever he wrote the words Bridge of Light. Modern chemists suggest the copper gall ink reacted to humidity. Romantic historians prefer to think the page remembered the man's voice. The second survivor appears a generation later or so. The sagas claim a fisherman from Trondheim who turns up at a winter market muttering an Old Norse so archaic that even scholars struggle to translate. He tells of a hall without walls and a sea that burns from beneath. When pressed, he falls silent, then laughs quietly for hours. Witnesses note strange marks along his forearms, small circles evenly spaced, each the size of a coin. The kiss of the thunder, he calls them. Historians remain divided about these riddle singers, as later storytellers call them. Some argue they're mythic insertions, archetypes of the lost traveller who returns touched by the divine. Others suspect folk memory of real wanderers, Vikings scattered by storms, shipwrecked or struck by lightning. Still others toy with more daring interpretations. What if they were from the vanished host, aged strangely, their sense of time fractured by trauma or something else entirely? Then there's the third and most troubling account. It surfaces in the 17th century, long after rationalism begins to tidy up the world. A farmer named Lars Pettersson claims to have found a man wandering the edge of the Sulan Valley barefoot in snow yet unfreezing. The stranger wears furs stitched with bronze clasps of unmistakably Viking design. His beard is frost-white, his speech archaic but coherent. I walked too long in the light, he tells Lars, and it forgot to stop walking in me. Before disappearing into the mist again, he leaves a small object in Lars's hand, a disc of glass fused with metal perfectly smooth, except for a spiral etched into its surface. The artifact, long lost, reappears in the archives of a 19th century antiquarian society. Early analysis describes it as unnaturally pure glass, free from bubbles, its pattern too symmetrical for primitive tools. When exposed to static electricity, the disc emits faint blue light. Today it sits in a private collection under the label Unverified Object, Norse Provenance Uncertain. A mainstream geological fact might explain it: fulgurite glass formed when lightning strikes sand. But fulgurite is brittle root-like, not smooth and polished. The object defies simple classification, just as the stories defy neat chronology. Modern neurologists studying the riddle language of trauma survivors note an uncanny resemblance to the fragmentary speech recorded in these ancient texts. After extreme stress, the human brain sometimes processes time non-linearly. Victims describe memories like flashes from different lives. Could that explain the wanderer's cryptic talk of bridges and halls? Possibly, yet it doesn't explain how each described the same images separated by generations: the glowing fog, the upward thunder, the burning shield. A quirky anthropological footnote deepens the mystery. In several rural parishes across Norway and Denmark, wedding songs still include a verse that no one translates fully: "Walk the stair of smoke come down in spring." Folklorists believe it traces back to these survivors, perhaps a warning folded into ritual. Others think it's just poetry that forgot its origin. Science, for its part, keeps nibbling at the edges. In the early 21st century, researchers analysing isotopic ratios from peat samples near the valley find traces of rare elements, tellurium and platinum, often linked to meteoric dust or high-energy electrical discharge. The data implies that something extraordinary did happen there, something that momentarily rearranged matter itself. But legends thrive where data hesitates. In the villages below the mountains, elders still tell children to stay indoors when fog glows blue. They say the cloud men walk again on such nights, tall, silent figures whose armour gleams like wet stone. They never come down to the farms, only pace along the ridges, guarding some invisible threshold. Every few years, hikers vanish in the same region. Most are found within days, disoriented, claiming they lost time. A few aren't found at all. Rescue teams blame weather, terrain and human error. The locals nod politely and light candles anyway. One winter evening, a storm rolls in from the sea, and a group of meteorologists stationed near Sulan report flashes of light crawling upward from the ground, blue-white filaments licking the clouds. The instruments record static strong enough to fry cameras. Their data log stops abruptly at the moment of the brightest flash. When recovered, it contains one corrupted audio file, a low rhythmic thud echoing like distant boots on stone. Skeptics point to equipment failure. Poets call it proof that the army still marches. As ever, both may be right. Historians analysing the saga fragments notice a pattern: each generation adds fewer words, as if the story itself is thinning like mist. The first survivors spoke in riddles, Their descendants sing in metaphors, modern witnesses only whisper. Perhaps the story is dissolving, returning to the fog that birthed it. Still late at night, when snow falls in silence, some say you can feel vibrations underfoot, steady, faint, the pace of men walking somewhere just out of sight. Whether it's the rumble of distant thunder or the echo of those who never came down depends perhaps on what you're ready to believe. The valley lies quiet now. 1,000 years of rain have carved its stones smooth, washing away footprints, stories, even names. Moss grows over the spiral marks, and the river that once glowed now runs clear, whispering only to itself. Yet sometimes, on still evenings, when mist crawls low and the air hums faintly, villagers pause mid-step, listening. There's a rhythm beneath the silence, a pulse like marching boots hidden inside the earth. Time has turned the legend of Bjorn Ironcloak's army into a mirror that reflects whatever age stares into it. For the medieval monks, it was proof of divine wrath. For Enlightenment scholars, a fable about ignorance. For modern scientists, a geological curiosity. For dreamers, an open wound in the sky. The truth sits somewhere between waiting with patient indifference. The most recent expedition to Ekerdalen, the Valley of Endless Echoes, took place last summer. Drones mapped the basin in perfect three-dimensional detail. Magnetometers traced faint rings of disturbance still visible under the soil like ripples frozen mid-motion. Samples show concentrations of magnetite far above the regional norm. Something once charged this place violently and never quite left. A mainstream geological fact when lightning strikes quartz-rich ground. The minerals retain microscopic patterns of polarization, tiny magnetic signatures that persist for millennia. Scientists call it fossil lightning. The Sulan Valley's readings suggest not one strike, but thousands woven together in an upward burst. The quirky tidbit everyone remembers from that expedition is stranger. A camera mounted on a drone captured what researchers first dismissed as lens flare vertical columns of faint blue light moving against the wind. Yet when analysed frame by frame, the beams align with the valley's acoustic nodes, the very spots that amplify echoes. Light and sound dancing the same pattern, as if the mountain is still rehearsing the song of its vanished army. Historians keep arguing, of course. Some insist that tales of men marching into the clouds describe an avalanche or a lightning storm, witnessed by terrified peasants. Others believe the legend compresses multiple disasters into one myth. But a minority, those who've spent long nights alone in the valley, speak differently. They say the air there remembers, that it listens, that the silence itself feels alive like a lung inhaling eternity. One of those scholars, an elderly woman named Ingrid Surley, the same physicist who once modelled the plasma column, returns in her twilight years. She hikes the path, slowly, her breath forming ghosts before her. The fog greets her like an old companion. When she reaches the plateau where the shield was found, she rests her hand on the rock. It vibrates faintly like a heartbeat waiting to be noticed. She whispers to the mist, "What remains of them?" and the echo comes back softer, "Of them." Then after a pause long enough for her pulse to slow, the valley replies again, not words exactly, but a sound like distant horns fading upward. She closes her eyes, smiling sadly. Still marching, she murmurs, "Perhaps it's imagination. Perhaps not." The phenomenon still resists every instrument. Magnetometers short out microphones record nothing but low hum, and yet visitors feel vibrations in their ribs. Scientists label it geological resonance. Poets call it memory. Folklore has its own phrasing, the breath of those who climbed too high. Astrid of the silver hair, the shield maiden who vanished beside Bjorn, becomes a mythic archetype in later centuries. Her story mutates. Sometimes she is Odin's messenger, sometimes a lost queen, sometimes simply the voice that calls wanderers into the fog. In modern Nordic art, she appears as a woman walking into clouds torch raised her reflection shining in mirrored lakes below. Her legend endures not because it's proven, but because it feels true, like grief that refuses to fade. Tourists still visit on misty weekends. They take selfies beside a modest monument inscribed in memory of those who vanished into the sky. The plaque is new, the sentiment ancient. On the best days, sunlight slices through fog and paints the valley in gold. On the worst, storms roll in thunder, shaking the ground as if the earth itself remembers that terrible upward fire. Historians still argue whether Bjorn's army ever existed, yet archaeologists keep uncovering fragments. Melted rings, fused glass, and once a bronze clasp, shaped like a serpent biting its own tail. The inscription translates loosely as we go where the world ends. And maybe they did. because the clouds still hang heavy over Sulan, endless and slow, their lower edges glowing faintly as dusk settles. To anyone standing there at twilight, it's easy to believe the sky still holds something, shapes that move within the mist, half visible, half longing. Look long enough and you might see them, shadows of men's shields glinting like dull stars, climbing forever into light that never burns out. Or maybe it's just vapour, a trick of weather the minds need to see meaning in patterns of grey. Either way, the effect is the same. The valley breathes, the heart quickens, and the silence deepens into story. And so, the mystery endures, half legend, half lightning, always beckoning. For some, it's a cautionary tale. For others, a promise that even the earth can dream of the sky. If you ever find yourself walking those ridges, take a moment to listen. When the wind drops and the world holds still, you may hear distant boots on unseen stone. Don't call out. Just listen and remember some marches never end. The story settles now, soft as fog on still water. The fire fades, the echoes hush, and only the steady rhythm of your breathing remains. The world of the Vikings drifts gently back into the clouds, where we found it half history, half dream. Maybe Bjorn and Astrid never lived at all, or maybe they still climb somewhere above us, one slow step at a time, into light that doesn't blind but comforts. Whatever truth hides behind the mist, it reminds us that mystery is the oldest companion of knowledge. Every age believes it has explained the world, yet somewhere just beyond the edge of its map, something waits quietly, humming to itself. It's in the lightning that rises instead of falls, in the silence that speaks in the stories that refuse to die. So as the embers of tonight's tale cool, let the images blur, the gleam of iron under aurora skies, the hum of the burning shield, the footprints that end in air. Let them drift into your thoughts like distant waves. Breathe slower. Let the mind wander but not worry. The Vikings marched into the clouds and never came down. We too wander through our own fogs of memory, of time of wonder, and that's all right. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only listened to. The wind outside the window may sound a little like thunder, or maybe it's just the night stretching its wings. Either way, let it soothe you. Close your eyes. The echoes fade, the valley grows quiet, and somewhere far away the drums of the vanished host keep perfect time with your heartbeat. Sleep well, traveller. The story stands guard until morning.